Crime in Court. My name is Heather, and this is episode, or no, part 7 of the state's case of the truth behind making a murderer, Wisconsin versus Steven Avery. And we're also going to look into the Wisconsin versus Blaine Dassey trial as well. But right now we are focused on the Steven Avery trial. I apologize that there has been a little bit of a lull in my videos for this series just because I've been watching the Karen Reed case, but also I've had some major computer issues. I don't want to get into it. It was bad. It took me a while to get set up and ready again, running again. So um, we're back and I'm ready to give you guys some good streams. So let's just dive in. Please hit that like button and let's get started. Our first witness today in Wisconsin versus Steven Avery trial will be, as you can see from the thumbnail on the screen, Sherry Culhane is going to be our witness, our first witness on the stand. Let me first go over real quick. Oops, I'm clicking on the wrong thing. Okay, so just briefly, we did, I believe we ended up on last we did day 8. So I just kind of want to go through the rest of the flow of the witnesses with you just so you have it, even though we're not going to go through everybody's testimony because we'll be here forever. All right, so um, last we finished up with Lieutenant James Lank. He was, in my opinion, not credible. He's the one that found the RAV4 key, which was also where Sergeant Colburn, another Manitowoc, both Manitowoc County Sheriff uh, law enforcement, and I feel like none of them should have even been on his property, let alone searching his house. And mm, it just doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, so he talked about in his testimony, we read it all. He talked about finding the key, and it didn't seem very believable. All right, so after him, we have Detective Dave Remaker. He's another Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department um, law enforcement official. So he, with Colburn and with Lank, were the 3 Manitowoc County Sheriff Department individuals who were on the scene with Lieutenant Dan Kucharski for most of it. He was the Calumet County Sheriff Department head guy for the search, but it would be one guy versus the other 3 Manitowoc, and they're all searching Stephen Avery's trailer, his garage months and months later to try to find bullet fragments to make it fit their narrative. It's just disgusting everything that they did, but all right, so let's keep moving. So Dan Kucharski was also there present when the RAV4 key was found by Lank and well, the only other people in the trailer were Manitowoc County. So he ended up being day 8 and day 9. As you can see, he rolls over into the morning of day 9. Then we have investigator Gary Steyer, who was a special investigator with Calumet County. He was present for finding the bullet fragments, which, like I said, was months and months later, I believe, when they found those in Stephen Avery's garage. They came back for a second, third, whatever search. They searched this property up and down. It's amazing that they only found that much because they were in that place a lot. All right. So then well, he was also part of the searches for the trailer and the yard. Then we had Special Agent Kevin Himmerl. I don't know if I'm saying that right. And he's Department of Justice, Wisconsin Department of Justice Division of Criminal Investigation. He was involved in the searches and the examination of the debris in the burn pit. I do highly recommend if you guys are interested in reading through the full transcripts, I am going to link them below in the description of this video, as I usually do in these, so you guys can follow along, or you can go back and look at other witnesses' testimony. All right, so we're now on day 10, and that's where we come in. I do want to say we got Katie Halbach here, who is Teresa's sister, and I chose, I went back and forth on this because I don't want to like not make Teresa important, so don't take it that way by me not reading it. It's just that I didn't want another person, confirming I haven't heard from her and it's out of her character and it's just kind of repetitive at this point. Some of the stuff. So I'm trying to get us through a little more swiftly as well. But if you do want to read Katie Hallback's testimony, I recommend you go look on day 10. All right, so after her, this Ronald L. Groffey takes a stand and he photographed the RAV4. So I'm sure his testimony was, yeah, I took that picture. Here's another picture. Yep, that's a picture I took. So we don't need to go through that. But the next one that I find is a key witness that I do want to go over is Sherry Culhane. And we are going to go through her testimony as well as Blaine Dassey and Scott Tadych today. So we got a little ride here. I think it's going to be interesting. So let's begin with Sherry Culhane. This is a state witness. We're in the state's case still. This is day 10, February 23rd of 2007. So we have to go back into the future a little bit here. All right, so Attorney Gahn is, if you can see my mouse kind of circling, that's the individual above my mouse is the one who is doing the questioning if you want a visual. All right, so Ms. Culhane, what is your occupation? I work as a forensic scientist in the DNA unit, a technical unit leader in the DNA unit at the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory in Madison. So she not only analyzes data, DNA data, but she also is a team leader. So she has supervisory responsibilities. So her job is not just DNA analysis, I want to point out. All right, so question, how long have you been employed with the State Crime Laboratory in Wisconsin? 23 years. And could you expand a little more on what your duties and responsibilities are at the crime lab? As a forensic scientist in the DNA section, I'm primarily responsible for the examination of physical evidence for the presence of biological material. We examine these items of evidence and try and identify the biological material and develop DNA profiles from those samples. We're also submitted reference samples from specific individuals. And again, we attempt to develop DNA profiles from those samples and simply compare the two to see if a specific person could or could not be the source of the evidence sample. So she gets an evidence sample from the crime scene, allegedly, or from the victim's clothing, whatever. And then you get the sample from the suspect, the individual that you think it is, and you compare the two and find out, is it your suspect? Really not difficult. I mean, we all kind of get that now, but I don't know. Also, I want to say she's been working for 23 years in this laboratory, and DNA, like the knowledge of DNA, moves so fast. So I often wonder, like, how accurate are we when we just advance technology so fast that like we can't even keep up with it? And how do we even quantify if there's problems with the new techniques that we're using, the new technology for DNA? Every time there's something new that we're doing, something different, like how can we even validate that? at this point. I don't know. I wonder about those kinds of things. Sorry, I didn't mean to get into a tangent. All right, so in addition to those duties, I also have technical leader responsibilities, and those include things like training new analysts, monitoring our quality control procedures, monitoring proficiency tests of the analysts. I'm also responsible for any new techniques, new equipment that is brought online at the laboratory, for signing off on those procedures and making sure that they are tested properly. I want to say that she has a lot of responsibilities. So many that it might even be like she's pulled in so many directions that mistakes could happen and she might not be paying attention fully to what's going on. If she's still analyzing data and doing all these other things that she just listed, I question her ability to focus on what she's doing and getting accurate things, accurate readings. All right, continuing on. Sorry. And I'm also responsible for case flow, making sure that we meet court dates, our cases are prioritized, and we get them out in a timely fashion. So she's responsible for like court proceedings and things like that too when it comes to DNA testing. So that's a lot of responsibility. By the way, I'm only reading the highlighted portions. I went through testimony already and highlighted just the portions that I thought were important. I'm not leaving stuff out necessarily that I think is, biased or whatever. I'm trying to take out questions just for the sake of time. I'm trying to take out, foundational questions and things like that, putting in all these photos and, whatnots. So I'm trying to make it a little more streamlined so we can get through them a little faster. All right. Anyways, so question, how long have you been conducting DNA testing? Answer, since 1996. And is your full workday solely devoted to DNA analysis? Yes, it is. How can you sit there and say that when you just told us you have all these other responsibilities that aren't DNA analysis? Right? I mean, right there. I don't find her credible, but all right, let's move on. Question. And can you tell us approximately how many DNA tests have you yourself run? Since 1996, a conservative estimate would be around 5,000. And what education do you have that qualifies you to perform DNA testing? I have a Bachelor of Science degree in biology. My training program in 1996, the original training program, consisted of a series of lectures, written tests, written exams that were all specifically related to the DNA typing process. I have also had coursework in molecular biology, statistics, and biochemistry class at the UW-Madison. I have also attended numerous schools and workshops that are specifically related to DNA typing methods and interpretation of those methods. And I'm going to skip through some of this foundational stuff. We don't need all of that. All right, where's the next section? Here it is. Okay, Miss Culhane, will you just take a moment and explain to the jurors what DNA stands for and what it is? I'm not even going to say that. I don't know how, but you know. You guys can read that. Deoxyribonucleic acid. Okay, I tried. There you go. And basically, it's the information storage system of a cell. That's what your DNA is. It's the way that the cells in your body store information. This slide, she has a whole PDF. I'm not even going to show you guys because it's really rudimentary. This slide is a short segment of DNA and it illustrates the fact that DNA is composed of smaller units that are strung together in a specific order. The order of those units is what determines the information and how that information is stored. Pretty amazing stuff that we have and the knowledge that we have of DNA at this point, and that's what makes us. But It's pretty interesting. Anyways, could you tell us about some of the characteristics of DNA and how it is inherited? The easiest way to think of DNA is to compare it to a blueprint. Just like when you are building a house or a building, you have a blueprint that gives you all the information that you need, all the components that are necessary to build that house or that building. DNA is exactly the same way, except it's on a cellular level. All of the information that your cells need to function to produce proteins and enzymes, all the things that make your body work, the information is contained in the DNA. And you can see here, this structure is referred to as a gene. That information is stored in these structures referred to as genes. Okay. From the time, so the information that makes us is stored in the genes. She just repeated her sentence. All right, so from the time of conception all the way through your life, the DNA is responsible for cellular development. It's responsible for how your cells develop. And many of our physical characteristics, such as eye color, hair color, pre, uh, predisposition to certain diseases, all of those things are controlled by the information in your DNA. Forensically, we are more interested in the portions of DNA that really do not function as a gene. They don't really do anything. Scientists aren't sure why they are there. And in the forensic application, there's a huge amount of variation within those portions of DNA. And so that's what we're really interested in. DNA is inherited from your biological parents. You receive 50% from your mother and 50% from your father, and you consequently pass on 50% of your DNA to your offspring. And these regions of DNA that we're interested in forensically are inherited in exactly the same way. Now, Ms. Culhane, you have used the word forensically a number of times and in a forensic context. Would you explain to the jurors what you mean when you say in a forensic science capacity? The word forensic is simply applying science to matters of law. So it's applying scientific principles to matters of law. Okay, that's her reasoning. Mhm. All right. Question. Would you describe that for the jurors? Describe what? Proficiency testing. Okay. Sorry. Do you and other members in your lab undergo what's called proficiency testing? Yes, we do. Would you describe that for the jurors and tell them what proficiency testing is? A proficiency test is designed to evaluate a laboratory system as well as individual analysts. The proficiency tests are designed to mimic actual case work examples. We purchase our proficiency tests from an outside company called Collaborative, and we're required to perform those tests each analyst twice a year. Most of the proficiency tests come to the laboratory. We treat them just like case samples. We take notes on them, we make documentation, and treat them just like a case. And most of them consist of two reference standards from a victim and a suspect, and two samples that are designed to mimic forensic samples. So they may be BLOOD samples, they may be other samples, I'm not going to say, or they may be a combination, the fluids from our bodies that provide samples, or they may be a mixture of those fluids. When we look at those samples, we do preliminary tests and presumptive tests on them to determine what type of fluid they are, and we develop DNA profiles from them. We also develop DNA profiles from our reference standards and compare the two just like we would in the actual case, and we make interpretations. All of those types are recorded and sent back to the company, and then after a period of time, we receive documentation back from the company whether we passed or whether we got all the types correct or not. All right. I wonder if that proficiency testing is going to come into play later. She was on the stand for a long time, so we did not read through all of it. We're not going to. There's a lot. Come on. Here we go. Sorry. All right, so do you remember exactly what were the evidentiary items that you examined in this case? Yes, or wait, in that case? Uh, I think we're talking about his DNA test from the 1985 case. All right, was it your understanding that Mr. Avery had maintained his innocence in the 1985 case? Yes. Do you remember exactly what were the evidentiary items that you examined in that case? Yes, I do. Could you tell the jury about those? In that case, I examined 11 pubic hairs that were taken from the victim's combings. Those were taken in an SA case to recover any hairs that had been transferred during contact. There were 11 hairs, 11 hairs, and I attempted DNA analysis on all 11. Only 2 of those hairs gave me a DNA profile. In the hair sample, we're actually looking at the root portion of the hair with cells attached to it. 2 of those hairs gave me results. 1 hair was from a male, 1 hair was from a female. The hair from the male was entered into the CODIS system and hit on an individual. Now you are going to have to explain for the jurors a little bit. What do you mean by the CODIS system and what do you mean by hit on an individual? The CODIS system, everyone should know this by now. The CODIS system is a database of DNA profiles that is maintained by the FBI. Forensic labs contribute samples, evidence samples to these databases. They are also a database of convicted offenders and anyone who has been convicted of a felony. It's different rules in different states, has to submit samples to this database. So when we have an evidence sample, it's entered into the database and it's searched against this index. And in this case, the male profile was entered into the system and searched. And what was the result of that search? It hit on another individual. When you say another individual, you mean someone other than Steven Avery? That's correct. And you yourself performed this testing, so this was to exonerate him. Yes, I did. And because of the testing that you performed and because of the search of the CODIS data bank, what happened to Mr. Avery? I believe he was freed from prison. And that was because of the testing that you did? Correct. Basically, did you follow the same protocol that you did in testing that case, testing the 1985 case, and you followed in this case? Yes, I did. Did you basically follow the same steps and procedures in the DNA testing? Yes. We're going to find out that might not be the case. Maybe some inconsistencies with, or some problems with collection of samples. And also the timing of when Steven Avery was exonerated and the testing and all that. Maybe some issues with that. We'll see. All right, so the current technology that we're using is referred to as STR typing. So that's her talking about the different kind of techniques or whatever. So it's the STR that she's using. All right, question. And could you tell the jurors a little bit about the DNR STR testing technique and the characteristics involved? STR typing is a PCR-based system that allows us to specifically amplify or make a lot of copies of specific target regions of DNA. These target regions of DNA are referred to as STR markers or genetic markers, and they are interspersed throughout all of your DNA. And never mind. I'll keep. All right. So the actual process that we use to make all these copies that I'm talking about is referred to as PCR. And that's the basis for this entire system. It allows us to copy these specific pieces of DNA to get a profile. When we develop a final profile that characterizes our stain, we look at 15 different target regions, like this all regions like this all throughout your DNA. So the final profile reflects the types at all 15 different locations on the DNA. Could you explain some of what? Sorry, dog is snoring. Sure you can hear him. All right, so this DNA testing that you do at the Madison Crime Lab, is this used in other fields besides criminal cases? Yes, it is. Could you explain some of those for the jurors? The basis of STR typing, like I said, is the PCR reaction. And PCR is used in many, many different applications. It's used in the medical community to diagnose diseases. It's used for medical research. It's used to detect genetic diseases or predisposition to certain diseases. It's also used in anthropology to type very old remains or old artifacts. It's also used for mass disasters such as Katrina, 911 or 9/11, all of those types of disasters. It's used to identify individuals that may have been involved in that. So it has many, many applications. The basic reaction, the system we're working with, has many different other applications besides forensics. That's interesting. I don't know why she got into all of that, but I just thought it was an interesting point that she makes. I was scrolling through forever. All right, here we go. Would you describe for the jury what you in the forensic community, the science community, refer to as contamination? What is contamination? In the laboratory, obviously, we can't control any evidence until it comes into the lab. Once it's into the laboratory, we have many steps that try to minimize the chance of contamination. When we use the word contamination, we are referring to the unintentional introduction of DNA into a sample or into a control. And what steps do you take to deal with the possibility of contamination? As you mentioned earlier, separating standards from evidence samples is one. We make sure that when we are opening our tubes that have DNA in them, we spin them down first in the centrifuge so that all the liquid on the top of the tube goes to the bottom. We use special sterilized tips when we're pipe pipetting, right? And removing liquid to make sure it's clean. We autoclave all of our regions to make sure our regions are clean and free of DNA. All of those steps are taken in order to minimize that risk. If contamination were to occur, does that necessarily mean you cannot interpret a DNA profile? Not necessarily. It depends on what it is. Do you maintain a log of instances of contamination in your laboratory? Yes, we do. And why do you maintain that log? Remember, this is the state's witness, and they're asking these questions, so they're trying to get ahead of certain things that they know are coming. Pointing that out. All right, we maintain that log it helps us troubleshoot in a lot of instances to find out where the contamination came from, where it was introduced, and what we can do to solve the problem. We have we have a list of everybody's DNA type in the laboratory, so all of the analysts know what their DNA type is. So it allows us, if we see any contamination, to see what the source of it is. Sometimes we can't determine the source of it. Sometimes it's very easy to see the source of the contamination. We can also tell if we have DNA that may have been introduced from the manufacturer, may have been introduced into our regions. So the contamination log is a learning tool. and it helps us determine where the contamination may have come from. Do you know, do all laboratories maintain contamination logs? All accredited laboratories are required to maintain a contamination log. As far as, and like I said, yes, we have one. And ours is because of as a learning tool and also because we're required by accreditation. Okay, I think she just threw in that learning tool for effect. Ms. Culhane, do you know, and I'm going to give you the date of January 1st of 2001. Since January 1st of 2001, how many instances of contamination have you logged at the Madison Crime Laboratory? I believe it was 89, and that's been since January 1st of 2001? Correct. So in 6 years, 7 years, 6 years, they've had 89 cases of contamination. Correct. And I would like to also ask you, do you know how many samples of DNA you have processed at the Madison Crime Lab during that same period of time, January 1st, 2001 to the present? A conservative estimate would be a little over, oh, I'm sorry, I thought 50, okay, 50,000. My eyes, man, reading this is really hurting my eyes. Um, because it's small on my screen. It's smaller than what you guys are seeing probably. 50,000. So a conservative estimate would be over 50,000. And of those over 50,000 cases, samples that you have analyzed, you have documented 89 instances of contamination? Correct. And how many analysts do you have working at any given time in the DNA unit? Anywhere from 8 to 12. And are those 89 instances of contamination over the past 5 years spread out among those analysts? Yes, they are. I find that number kind of low. I feel like contamination is super easy and can easily happen in your lab, especially if you don't clean your equipment perfectly every time. So I have a feeling that it's a low number. All right, so tell the jurors what you do when an item of evidence is submitted to you. What's the first thing you do? The first thing we do is a visual examination of the item. We're looking, as I stated earlier, for a biological material, and a lot depends on what type of case it is. So we basically make a visual examination of the item. We take notes and we document the packaging of the item, what the item would look like, and exactly what we did. Depending on what biological material we're looking for, we have what's referred to as presumptive test or preliminary test. And these tests give us a good indication of what kind of biological fluid that we're looking for. We perform those preliminary or presumptive tests on the evidence or on the stain itself. And from that point, we make decisions as to which direction we should go, whether we should continue with the analysis to take it to the final step, which is DNA, or do we stop? And we do a visual exam, and there is no indication of and if we do, sorry, let me start that sentence over. If we do a visual exam and there is no indication of a biological material and it's not an item that was submitted specifically to be examined for touch DNA that's left by touching, then that's the end of our analysis. In the presumptive test that we do for whatever biological fluid we're looking for is negative, and that's also the end of our analysis. So did you conduct presumptive tests on any of the items, 180 submissions to you? Yes, I did. Basically, Ms. Culhane, what were you looking for in this case? The bulk of the evidence in this case, I was looking for blood stains. Do you know how many submissions of this evidence that you submitted to presumptive tests for blood? Yes, tell me, 41. And did you get positives in those presumptive tests? Yes, they were all positives. 41 positives for BLOOD. What, how do you decide what to test and how to test it? A lot depends on the piece of evidence it is, the results of our presumptive testing, and also we have information as to what the alleged incidents are. Police officers and law enforcement that submit items of evidence will request certain testing based on whether they believe the item we're looking for is probative, whether it's going to provide information or not. So that plays into the decision that we make as to what type of analysis and how far we go. So you rely upon the investigators in the field and what they are finding. Is that correct? Correct. And they will make recommendations to you on the probative value of a particular piece of evidence? Yes. Do they ever ask you to prioritize an item of evidence and put it at the top of the list for testing? Yes. And why does that happen? A lot of times, we're not really sure. That's information that they have. They may want results of a particular item of evidence sooner than the additional items of evidence. Usually, it's prioritized based on what is the most probative and what is most important to their investigation. Now, you have spoken a number of times about standards and about reference samples, and once again, so the jury is clear, what is a standard? A standard is a known sample from a specific individual and is in most cases we request buccal swabs, which is the swabbing of the inside of the cheek because that's a rich source of DNA. So the inside of someone's cheek is swabbed and that sample is used as a reference for their DNA types. Now these are called also reference samples? Yes. And are they sometimes called reference samples? Yes. Okay. Next. Oh, they get into big oh no, I thought they got into a big argument, legal argument. Question. I'm going to show you what has been marked as Exhibit 298. I'm sorry, 298, and previously identified as the 1999 Toyota RAV4 of Teresa Halbach. Do you recognize that? Yes, I do. When was the first time you saw that vehicle? On November 7th of 2005. And when I first saw the vehicle, it was in the garage bay at the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory. And what action did you take at that time? I was assigned to this case, to process the car for biological materials. And how did you go about processing the vehicle and tell the jurors, like, what did you do first and then next in your process? The first step, processing a vehicle or any item of evidence, is, like I said before, I do a visual examination. When I saw the vehicle, it had already been photographed, the doors were open. I looked inside the car, and it was obvious there were numerous reddish brown stains that were consistent with the appearance of BLOOD. It began to go through I began to go through and sample each one of these areas of staining and take notes and document where the stains were and what my preliminary tests indicated. I performed preliminary tests of all the stains that were the appearance of blood stains, reddish brown stains. And again, I designated each one of these stains. The item designation of the vehicle was item A. And as I recovered stains from that, I numbered them A1, A2 until I recovered the number of stains. Alrighty, so she recovered a bunch of stains in the car. Did she do presumptive testing or she just eyeballed them and said, I'm going to take these stains and sample them? All right, question. And would you describe for the jurors exactly how you did the presumptive test? Presumptive test is a color test, and it basically reacts positively with BLOOD. I took a cotton swab, moistened it with sterile water. I swabbed just a little tiny bit of the stain and put regions on it. If it's BLOOD, it turns bright red or pink, bright pink, and a negative reaction has no color change. So I performed, so that's what I performed on this stain. Because it was positive, it gave me a good indication that this was probably a blood stain. So from that point, I sampled the stain and I was actually going to do my typing from. And tell the jurors how you sampled that. I took another clean swab, put sterile water on it, and basically just removed some of the stain onto the cotton swab and then allowed it to air dry. And then what did you do with the cotton swabs? I put it in, I had a in the space where I was working, I have a test tube rack and I had a test tube and put the cotton swab in there and allowed it to air dry. And did you seal the tube? Like just leaving it on your desk? That's room for contamination right there, right? I mean, if it's not sealed and she's just working around it so it air dries. All right, come on, next. Don't worry, we still have a lot more to go with her. Oh no, I mean I'm skipping a lot, but a lot of the stuff that I'm skipping with her is her identifying pictures that they want to bring into evidence, and she's like, "Yep, that I took. I took that. Yep, that's the one I took. That's the stain there." So I didn't feel like we needed to read all of that to get us through her testimony because there was a lot of back and forth too. All right, come on, jeez, Louise. All right, question. In this DNA profile that you developed from the cuttings and the swabs from the RAV4, did you compare that profile to the DNA profile that you developed from Teresa Halbach's pap smear, which was something that they had on file, they had on record, in her medical records, they had that as a standard, that was their standard that they were trying to compare to see if um, things matched Teresa's when they needed to compare to see if it matched Teresa, I should say. All right, so yes, I did. And according to your reports, does this slide correctly display your findings? Yes, sir, it does. Would you please point out to the jurors your findings and conclusions? Again, these are all the genetic markers, and you can see that the type from the evidence samples are consistent with the type from the pap smear of Teresa Halbach. So with the genetic marker, the evidence sample is 16,18. Teresa is 16,18. And this marker, it's a 69.3. Teresa is a 69.3. And all of these markers are consistent with the ones from Teresa Halbach. So basically, if like you get a printout and you see like the different little lines where there's a marker and it'll say like the 69.3 or whatever. And you can literally do a side by side of your standard and your sample, and it'll look identical, each of where all the little lines are. And it's kind of interesting to look at. But it could be misinterpreted too. That's another reason why. And there can be anomalies, there can be issues with the testing. You have to do multiple samples of these things. You can't just do one sample, done and over with, and that's it. You should also have leftover. Like you should never try to use up the remainder of all of your sample in one testing because then you can't compare it. You need to compare. You need to also not just compare, but you need to repeat the same conclusion in these testings. And I don't know if everybody does that either. You need to be able to replicate your findings, and it doesn't seem like it's always like that. Anyways, all right, so question. And I'm going to show you a slide and ask you if this correctly depicts the statistical analysis that you performed. Yes, it does. And would you explain to the jurors what this slide means? Remember earlier I said that we do a statistical analysis when we have a match between an evidence sample and a reference sample. If we have an exclusion, we're finished. That's the end of it. But if you have a match between an evidence sample and a reference sample, then you have to determine how common or how rare that match is, or I mean that profile from the evidence sample is in the population. Let's keep going. All right, so the first number here tells me that the probability of finding someone in the Caucasian population, some unrelated random person that has the same profile as the evidence sample, the probability of that is one person in 416 quadrillion in the Caucasian population, one person in 642 quadrillion in the African American population, one person in 641 quadrillion in the southeastern Hispanic population, and one person in one quintillion in the southwestern Hispanic population. So you are not necessarily saying this is a match. You're saying a probable percentage wise of how many people on this planet, how many people on this planet should have these same results. I don't know how likely it is. So you get the understand. Blah, blah, blah. So anyways, so I hope you understood what I was trying to say. The prob You come up with a probability. You can only say to a scientific degree of certainty, but it's not necessarily it's not infallible. It's not like there can't be errors in things made when doing the DNA testing. So it's very, very, very important that the contamination and things like that don't occur or are monitored, really, really closely monitored for that reason. Especially you don't want the wrong person convicted for a crime and going to jail for somebody else's crime. I mean, we can't live in a society like that. And unfortunately, that's what's happening now. I'm actually going to do a Innocence Lost episode on an individual. His name is Lucas Anderson, and he was framed basically by his own DNA. So his DNA was somehow at a crime scene that he was never at. And I'm going to get into that in Sunday's episode of Innocence Lost. So definitely hit the notification bell so that you don't miss out on those episodes. It's my wrongfully conviction series. I have a whole series where I do stories on people who were wrongfully convicted for crimes that they didn't commit based on faulty or even manufactured evidence, hiding evidence, all sorts of reasons why people go corruption or just flat out negligence. But a lot of times you find there's corruption there, or just dirty, dirty people playing dirty. All right, question: would you explain to the jurors what that is? Again, these are the genetic markers in that we're looking at. So they're looking at what the findings are on display. You will notice here that there are two, whoops, oh, nobody knows. The dogs are so loud. They all, like, every one of them struggles to get their footing and they just like slide all over these wood floors and they don't know how to get up and they make so much noise. So I apologize. Sorry for that. All right. No, 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 no. These are the genetic markers that we're looking at, and these are the types. You will notice here there are no numbers at these positions, these markers. And the reason is because there was a fairly degraded sample of DNA. DNA is a very stable molecule. However, it breaks down and is degraded and broken up into pieces by several things, heat being one of them, sunlight, nucleuses in the environment that it chew up. What? But this was obviously a sample that had been subjected to intense heat. And so, therefore, on these fragments, these STR markers, which are fairly large, the fragments, there was not enough DNA at those positions to develop a type. Do you compare the partial profile with the DNA profile that you obtained from the pap smear of Teresa Halbach? Yes, I did. And would you please explain what your findings were to the jury? At the marker positions where I did get results, these types are consistent with Teresa. Obviously, I don't know what the types are here because there were no results. But for everything else, all the types that I actually developed, they were consistent with Teresa Halbach. But there were types that weren't. So, does that mean you've got a contaminated sample or a mixture? She didn't explain that. Question. And how did you process the bullet? So she also got the bullet in her laboratory. When it came crime laboratory, um, the bullet came into the crime laboratory on March 16th, 2006. So that was much later because, as you recall, they were searching in 2005 for Teresa, right at the end of um, Halloween. She went missing on Halloween 2005. And they went back to the Avery property in March of 2006 to search yet again, even though they went through that property with a fine-tooth comb the first time and didn't find any bullet fragments. They went back and found bullet fragments that they believed were associated with the weapon, what ended her life. And what was I going to say? No, I lost my train of thought. Sorry. Anyways, let's keep rolling. Rolling. All right, so how do you process the bullet? The first thing I did was, just like every item of evidence, it was visual examination. There was nothing visual on the fragment. There didn't appear to be any stains. So, in order to remove the residual DNA that might have been on the bullet, I washed it. What? How was it reserving it? So in order to remove any residual DNA that might have been on the bullet, I washed it. I put it in the test tube and washed it with some buffer that we use to extract the DNA. And the washing of that bullet, the washing liquid, is what I performed the rest of my procedure on. And what were you able to develop a and were you able to develop a DNA profile from the washing of item FL, the bullet? Yes. And would you explain to the jury? The profile from the bullet is consistent with all of the types from Teresa Halbach. You will notice at D16 she's missing the 13 type, and at TPOX she is missing the 10 type. And again, those peaks are visible, but again, she's referencing a visual aid that she's got for the jury. But they are below our threshold for calling those types. Did that have any impact on your match criteria in this interpretation? The impact is that I cannot use the information, the frequencies at this marker and at this marker to figure out my final frequency. In other words, I had to calculate the frequencies at all of the other markers except D16 and TPOX. But nothing about those two asterisks that you have on your chart were excluded. Teresa Halbach as being on the bullet. That's correct. So they're saying she's on the bullet. Was Teresa's profile the only profile that they found on the bullet? Yes. Were there any mixtures? No. And your profile was found where? In the negative control, which should have had just regions in it. It should not have any DNA in it. And how do you think your DNA profile got into the control? I believe my DNA profile was introduced during the extraction procedure when I was talking. At the time when I was setting up these samples, I was training two analysts, newer analysts, in the lab. I don't have a whole lot of confidence in Ms. Culhane anymore. And they were watching me. This sample was not an average sample simply because we handled it very differently. Well, shouldn't you have handled it better to not contaminate it? It wasn't a swabbing and it wasn't a cutting. The washing part of it was a little bit different than we usually do. So I was explaining to them what I was doing and as I was setting it up. And apparently, I felt as if I was far away enough away from my workbench not to introduce my DNA, but apparently I was incorrect. Now, your DNA did not come up on the bullet, did it? No. It was only on the control? That's correct. So in the control sample, her DNA came up. In Teresa's control sample, Sherry Culhane's DNA came up. I should be more specific. All right, so it only was in the control. That's correct. Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty whether Teresa is the source of the DNA on item FL, the bullet? Yes. And what is that opinion? I believe she is the source of the DNA on that bullet. All right. So we've got confirmation that she believes her DNA was found on that bullet. Going to testing and all sorts of details here. All right, and that contains a swab from the hood latch of Teresa Halbach's or RAV4. So they were going through more samples, and now they got to the sample of the swab from the hood latch. Yes. And did you perform DNA testing on that hood latch? Yes. Swab. Yeah. Do you recall when you looked at the swab, did you notice any condition to it as far as color? It was discolored, but it did not have the appearance. It was not a reddish brown discoloration consistent with BLOOD. So it did not appear to have BLOOD on the swab. Correct. Did you compare this profile that you found on the swab of the hood latch of Teresa Hallback's RAV4 with the DNA profile that you developed from the buccal swab of Steven Avery? Yes, I did. And does this next slide, correctly display your findings? Yes, it does. And would you please describe your findings to the jurors? At each of the markers, the types from the swabbing on the hood latch were consistent with the types from Steven Avery's buccal swab or buccal swab, say either one. If you look at all the numbers for all of the markers, they are consistent with the entire profile. Now, you testified before that you received a number of standards at the crime lab, did you? Yes. In other words, you received buccal swabs from Alan Avery, Brian Dassey, Brendan Dassey, Barb Jonda, Bobby Dassey, Earl Avery, Chuck Avery, and Dolores. Is that correct? Yes. Got samples from the whole family to look at. And All right. Oh no, direct examination continued. I thought that was cross-examination. She's still going on the stand here. She's got more samples to explain. All right. So when you received this key, how did you process it, Miss Culhane? I received the key. It was in a sealed brown paper bag. I opened it. I had gloves on, and I held the metal part of the key in one hand, and I swabbed the back. I should show you up here this black rubberized part of the key with a sterile cotton swab. And I did it in very much the same way that I swabbed the Pepsi can that we looked at earlier. So they took a Pepsi can out of the RAV4 that they compared to Teresa Halbach's DNA. At this point, there was no visible indications of any staining, so I was primarily interested to see if I could recover DNA that had what what did I miss? Oh, sorry, that had been left behind by possibly touching. So they're looking for touch DNA. So I swabbed all of the surfaces, the front and back, and the edges of the key, and that's what I did my analysis on. After you did the swabbing of the key, did you do anything else with the key? Yes, I did. Please explain to the jurors what you do with the key. I took the key to see if it fit the vehicle, so I put the key into the ignition. I still had, of course, gloves on during this entire process. I put the key into the ignition and turned the ignition. It did turn the ignition, but it did not crank the car. And I later learned it was because I believe the battery had been disconnected, but it did actually turn completely over. I also looked, I believe it was the front driver's side door, and used the key to unlock the door. Would you explain to the jury your findings? Again, we looked at the same 15 markers, and at each of these markers I developed a type. And this is the profile that characterizes the swabbing that I took from the key. And again, this profile that you developed from the key, is that a profile that came from a male individual? Yes, it is. And we have an X and a Y chromosome, which indicate the male individual. And did you compare the profile that you developed from your swabbing of this key with the DNA profile that you developed from the buckle swab of Steven Avery? Yes, I did. And does this next slide correctly show your findings? Yes, it does. So, okay, again, she explains, yes, I got swabs from all these other individuals, blah blah blah. Come on. See how we've been here an hour and we've skipped a lot of her testimony. All right, where's the next part? Still going. But you see how we have some stories that they tell us. Like at the very beginning, he tells us, "Oh, you exonerated him, right?" Like just because she exonerated him in the 1985 case doesn't make her a martyr or a saint or something. It just makes her the one who had been doing the testing, and it also proves that she does a heck of a lot of the testing around there, and maybe she shouldn't be. All right, they get into a big argument, Kratz and Buting, so that's why we've got all this. I didn't want to go into reading all of it with you guys. This is ridiculous. Oh, good. End of proceedings. So that was the end of day 10. Perfect. So let's take day 10 off. We're going to go to day 11, February 26, 2007. And I believe we start. Do we still have cross? Okay, hold on. We've got cross first. Let me make this bigger. All right. Cross-examination by attorney Buting. All right, I want to pick up where you left off on Friday, and that is your opinions or series of opinions about the stains that you found in the RAV4. Okay, are you with me? Mm-hmm. Your opinion over and over to Mr. Gahn was, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty as to whether Mr. Avery is the source of the DNA found in stains 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, right? Right. And what you are really saying is that, as far as you could tell, Mr. Avery is the original source of the DNA that you find in those stains, correct? I'm saying that his profile was consistent with what I found in the stains. Right. And what you are not saying is anything about how his DNA found its way inside the RAV4, are you? No. So your tests aren't designed to tell us how this DNA found its way into the location where you ultimately swabbed, are they? No. What are you looking for? What? Oh, what you are looking for is a DNA profile, and if you find it, then you compare it to a known reference sample. In this case, Mr. Avery, right? Right. But if someone else planted Mr. Avery's DNA or BLOOD or both inside that vehicle, you wouldn't know that from the test, would you? No. So you cannot tell this jury with any degree of certainty, scientific or otherwise, that Stephen Avery was himself ever inside that vehicle. Can you? No. No meaning correct? That's correct. All right. You also talked about contamination, and I think you used the word unintentional contamination. Do you recall a discussion about that? Yes, I do. All of the quality controls that you set up inside the Wisconsin Crime Lab are designed to deal with evidence after it arrives at your lab, correct? That's correct. You can't do anything about contamination that might occur to evidence before it gets to your lab, correct? That's correct. And that would be true for unintentional contamination, such as an officer who's sloppy at the scene when he's picking up whatever evidence it may be. That's correct. Your tests and your quality control doesn't count, doesn't or can't account for that, right? Right. And that also would be true as to intentional contamination that occurred before it gets to your lab as well, right? Correct. Once again, so you have no way through your quality control tests controlling whether or not there's some intentional deliberate tampering with the evidence that takes place before it gets to the lab. That's correct. So if the evidence had been intentionally contaminated or tampered with before it got to the lab, your test will not show that. Isn't that right? That's correct. Now, it's assuming that you would agree with me on this, that normally evidence that you receive from an agency that is a police um, or that is police is you are assuming that when you get it that there's good integrity with the evidence, right? Correct. That is the truest I'm sorry, you trust. My dog's walking. Can everybody sit down? Thank you. Very distracting when I'm reading. All right, so question. That is, you trust the police to be honest and fair in an investigation generally, right? Correct. Just as we and the jury would trust you and other members of the Wisconsin Crime Lab to be honest and fair in your investigation. That's correct. And the reason that we can normally be comfortable with that assumption with regard to the crime lab is that you would never knowingly assign an analyst to examine case evidence who had some connection to a suspect, would you? No. And I'm sure, for instance, you yourself, if you had been deposed as a witness in a lawsuit brought by a suspect, you would not volunteer to be the person who runs the tests in that case, would you? No. And you would if you knew that one of your other analysts was also similarly situated with regard to a suspect. You would not assign that analyst to be handling the evidence and making the tests that are done in this case, would you? Not that, not if they had a personal attachment to anyone in the case. No. Sure. Because it's important for you that your lab be objective in its results, correct? Correct. You are aware that some labs in other parts of the country have had trouble with that, right? Where analysts have been factually accused of falsifying results. Attorney Gan objects to that. Buning says, well, you would agree with me that if somebody in your lab was so predisposed, it would be very easy for that person to frame a suspect. If you wanted to, you could do it, right? If somebody in your lab wanted to monkey, okay, somebody in your lab wanted to monkey with the evidence and plant it in a way that deliberately framed a suspect, that could be done, couldn't it? Another objection. Then Buting says if somebody wanted to take and deliberately contaminate evidence, once it got to your lab, deliberately contaminate evidence, and that's, say, put or mix a reference sample from the suspect with actual evidence in the case, that could be done, couldn't it? It's possible that that could be done, but sure, in my opinion, that wouldn't happen. Of course not, because you take steps to be sure that the person assigned to the case would have no such inclination to do so. Isn't that right? That's correct. I mean, yeah, he has such good arguments here. And you take steps to be sure that the person assigned to the case has no stake in the outcome of the testing itself or the case. And of course, there's another objection, but it doesn't matter because the jury hears the questions, which is all that matters. All right. So you take steps to be sure that the person assigned to a case has no stake in the outcome of the case or the test. That's correct. All right. And indeed, it's your assumption that when evidence comes to you from a police agency, it's your assumption that the police have also taken similar stakes or similar steps to make sure that nobody connected with a suspect has been involved in the collection of the evidence. Isn't that right? Objection. The court says she can answer. Okay, obviously, I don't know any of this for a fact, but I would make the assumption that evidence came in from the police agency that was maintained integrity and collected from somebody who had no connection to the case. You would hope. Yes. But that's not what happened here. All right, Mr. Gunn pointed out that you were actually the analyst who did the test that resulted in the exoneration of Mr. Avery in 2003. Correct? Correct. And you did that because, in part, because newer, more accurate DNA results or tests had been developed that actually excluded Mr. Avery as the source of the hair sample. Correct. At the time the original case was worked, DNA was not available. And your test in 2003 absolutely, positively excluded Mr. Avery as the source of one of those hairs, right? Correct. There was no question about that, right? Correct. And it included or matched a fellow by the name of Gregory Allen, right? Yes. So Gregory Allen was the actual perpetrator who was ID'd after Steven Avery spent like 18 years in prison. Actually, no, take that back. It was like uh, 6 years before he got out of prison, they knew, or something like that, and they just sat on the information. So, all right. So his DNA profile was registered in CODIS. That's correct. And in fact, he was already in prison at the time of 2003 when you did the test. That's correct, Gregory Allen. So in prison for R that he committed after or while Mr. Avery sat in prison for Mr. Allen's crime. That's correct. Now, what Mr. Gahn didn't have to point out, though, let's get into a few other things. Although you were one who although you were the one who exonerated or whose test exonerated Mr. Avery, evidence sat at your lab for more than a year before you got around to doing the test that did exonerate him, right? That's correct. They sat there for a year without testing it. And one of the things that you, in fact, said you do is control priorities and case flow of what gets tested when, right? Correct. So, had you done the test as soon as it came in 2003, the evidence being in September of 2002, I believe Mr. Avery would have been exonerated then, wouldn't he? Correct. So, Mr. Avery sat for another year in prison because of the delays that resulted in your crime lab. Isn't that right? Correct. I mean, you gotta face it. You can't deny that. It sat there for that long. Another thing Mr. Gahn didn't point out is another irony in this case. Not only were you involved in the 2003 exoneration of Mr. Avery, but you were also involved in the 1985 conviction of Mr. Avery, weren't you? I worked evidence on that case, yes. So she did the evidence testing to get him put away in prison back in 1985, wrongfully, for 18 years he served, and she also exonerated him. So, like, you can't just say, you throw that at us. The state throws at the fact at us that, oh, yeah, she exonerated him, so she's good. Like, she's a good tester. You obviously have to trust her because she exonerated him. But then they forget to say that she also was the one to put him away. So there's that. And he was not the right individual. So whatever tests that she did at the time, her her testing helped put him behind bars. I Where did I leave off? Right here. So not only were you involved in his exoneration, you were involved in his conviction. I worked the evidence on that case. Yes. And you testified as a witness for the prosecution at trial in that case, didn't you? Yes, I testified. In fact, the trial where he had 16 alibi witnesses and was convicted included your expert opinion regarding some hairs that had been found and were offered by the prosecution to somehow link Mr. Avery to the crime. Isn't that right? To be perfectly honest, I do not remember my entire testimony from 1985. Do you recall? I think he refreshes her memory with the testimony. Do you recall that you testified generally in those terms, right? Yes. Okay. And just so we understand, there were no DNA tests back in 1985? Correct. And you were testifying about a type of so called science known as microscopic hair comparison analysis, right? Correct. And the theory behind that science in 1985 was that you could take a microscope with two fields and you could put one hair underneath one microscope field and another hair under the other, and you could examine the two of them together, correct? And the theory being that you could present this to the jury anyway, that you could make some conclusions about how similar, dissimilar, or consistent one hair was to the other, correct? Now, with the advent of DNA, the forensic community discovered something about those tests, right? Correct. They discovered that those conclusions or opinions that were being drawn by the experts, such as yourself, were really not all that reliable, didn't they? Correct. They have been proven to be much less specific than DNA analysis. All right. And even wrong on occasions, right? Correct. All right. So basically, junk science, the hair comparison stuff is total junk science. Would you agree with me, at least, that hair comparison, microscopic hair comparison, so-called forensic science, is one example of how science is not necessarily, or our understanding of science is not necessarily infallible, is it? No. With respect to hair analysis, that was a much less objective criteria than what we use today. That was more subjective and open to interpretation, personal interpretation. So, her personal interpretation. The science that we use now, today, with DNA is much more objective and much more reliable, but there still is the opportunity for human error and um, what was the word they used? I can't remember now. Personal interpretation. Personal interpretation. Okay, but at the time you were presenting testimony, you expressed it in terms of a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, didn't you? In 1985, I do not remember how I stated that. Well, in general, whether in Mr. Avery's case or any of the cases that you presented this kind of hair comparison testimony, you presented opinions to juries or to courts to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, didn't you? And then he objects, abstain, relevancy, okay, blah, 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 blah. We're going to skip through some more, but you get the point. I mean, he's got great questions. They talk about blood types and things like that because that was really all we knew back then. You couldn't compare or like secretor or non-secretor. I don't think they talk about that in the case, but it's another thing where that's kind of debunked. Like that means nothing. All right, so up on the screen now is Exhibit 341, and this is one of those phone messages that you got from, in this case, Mr. Fassbender, correct? Yes. You've got a place to indicate that where it says you check incoming Fassbender's name, and the date on this is November 11th of 2005, correct? Yes. And the very first thing that is indicated on here, he is telling you that there's some evidence that is going to be coming or is already here, right? Yes. Here meaning at your lab. Correct. And he says there are going to be a couple of items from the house and the garage, right? Right. And then he says, or you wrote down, I assume that's him telling you, try to put her in his house or garage, correct? So um, Special Agent Fassbender, one of the co-lead investigators in this case, is sending or giving messages to the DNA analysis team that some items are coming your way, and why don't you try to place him in the garage or the house? Make sure you get his or get her DNA, sorry, place her in the house or garage because that's where they needed her to fit their narrative. They needed her in his house and garage. That's an outrage. Like you should be outraged by hearing that law enforcement officer tell the DNA team what to do or how to do it or what to find, where to find it, that kind of thing. You shouldn't be doing that. That's total corruption of the case. I mean, you can't trust anything at this point now. All right, so she says correct. And so you are being told before you do any of these tests that Mr. Fassbender wants you to come up with results that put Teresa Halbach in Mr. Avery's house or garage. Isn't that right? I had that information, but that had no bearing on my analysis at all. Okay, but even if it didn't, it's in the back of your mind. It's in your unconscious mind as you're doing all the testing. So you might not think that you're trying to get a result that way, but your subconscious is telling you to do it because you already heard it and it's back there. That information can't be unheard. So now you know what you're supposed to do. It's unbelievable. Anyways, he says, of course not, but that's what you are being told to do. That was information in the investigation. That's what Mr. Fassbender told you he hoped you would be able to do with your tests. Isn't that right? Yeah, I assume so. Okay, so also had some emails with Mr. Kratz, correct? Yes. Actually, before we get to that, let me do one more here. They take exhibit number 342. Would you be able to identify that for us? Yes. That's another one of those case contamination records. Yes. But this one, though, is dated December 15th. Correct. Concerns another phone conversation with Mr. Fassbender? Yes. Mind if I put it up on the Elmo? No. This is, again, an incoming call where Mr. Fassbender is calling you, right? Yes. Now, the first entry we should clarify a little bit. It says swab keys and collect swabs, no need to analyze at this time, right? Correct. Just so we're not confused, the jury is not confused. That is not in reference to this Toyota key that was brought to you earlier, right? Correct. It was a completely separate test that was done. This is some other keys that they brought you. Yes, this was referencing some additional keys. It also says, like a couple days later, 4 days later, that Mr. Fassbender wants you to swab handcuffs and leg irons, right? Yes. As well as the license plates from the RAV4 and to check the 22 caliber gun item DD for any indication of the victim's VLOOD on the barrel, right? Yes. And also to swab the trigger guard around to compare with Steven Avery. Correct. And we'll get into this with a little more detail with some of the other things first, but as long as we're at these phone messages, let me just clear this up. You did do that in this case, right? Yes, you swabbed the handcuffs and the leg irons. Yes. And you found no DNA of Teresa Halbach on those items, did you? No. And you swabbed the license plates and you found no usable DNA that you could draw any conclusions from, right? Right. And you checked the item DD 22 caliber gun. That's a rifle, right? Yes. But you looked for any BLOOD of the victim and on the barrel, right? Correct. You found no DNA of Teresa on that barrel. Correct. You looked at the trigger guard as well, not just the trigger guard, but the trigger itself. Yes, you swapped both. Correct. And you found no DNA of Mr. Avery, right? Correct. Okay. And as to the handcuffs and leg irons, you did find some DNA on it, though, didn't you? Yes, I did. You found Mr. Avery's own DNA. It's a mixture sample, yes. In a mixture with some other male, right? I can't tell for sure whether it was a male or a female. Well, it wasn't a mixture with Teresa Halbach, correct? Probably got contaminated in the scene, or I don't know. I mean, it could have been also his girlfriend's DNA. And the fact that you found DNA of any kind on the handcuffs is an indication that they hadn't been wiped down with bleach, isn't it? That would be correct. Okay, and you of course had no idea, no way of knowing how old the DNA that you did find from Mr. Avery on those handcuffs or leg irons was, right? Right. That's one thing about DNA. When you find a profile, you can't tell when it is or when it was originally deposited, correct? Yes, that's correct. You find DNA sometimes in mummies thousands of years old. That's correct. And we're going to argue a bunch of stuff. We go into a bunch of arguing. Buting and gone about what can come in probably. It's frustrating. There's so much. Um, is there not more? I thought there was more. Maybe I'm done. Maybe that was where I ended it. So as you can see, Sherry Culhane, she was, I mean, she was on the stand for a long time. She's not even done. But I mean, all of her scientific techniques were definitely looked into, questioned, obviously. There was some proficiency testing that um, might have been a little sketch, you know. They might not have been on the up and up with all the analysts in the lab. So you got to take into account their training and their ability to stay on top of the latest advancements and being able to read what they're interpreting, you know, personal interpretation. You can't use, unfortunately, it's necessary, but you also don't want a lot of it in your results, especially when it comes to DNA testing. All right, so right here, I'm going to pause and take a little break, and I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Um, all right, so Blaine Dassey, we are moving on to Blaine Dassey, day 12 of the Steven Avery trial. And so this was February 27th, 2007. And Blaine Dassey is the nephew of Steven Avery and the brother of Brendan Dassey. So we're not going to read all of it again, just some highlighted portions that I found here. All right, so he is being questioned by attorney Ken Kratz. How old are you? 18. Do you go to school? Yes. Could you tell the jury where you go to school, please? Michigan High School. Have you gone to Michigan High School your entire high school career? No. Last year, that is, in 2005, can you tell the jury what school you went to then? Reedsville. Blaine, I'm going to direct your attention to October 31st, Halloween of 2005. Ask if you remember that day. Yes. Can you tell the jury where you were living then? Avery Road. Okay. You don't have to give me the exact address, but who did you live with there? My mom and my stepdad. Okay. Now, this Avery Road property, can you kind of describe this property for us? It's a salvage yard. All right. I'm going to, like, that's not really a great description, but okay. I'm going to put on the screen to help you an exhibit that's already been marked, whatever, or already received. And blah, blah, blah. Do you recognize it? Yes. Tell the jury what it is. That's the salvage yard. We've been through those pictures a bajillion times. Blaine, um, Blaine, I want you to take the laser pointer and I want you to circle or point on the exhibit for the jury what your house is if you can tell us. It's right there. All right. Are you pointing to a property? And I think it is uncontested that that's the Barb Jonda trailer. Is that right? Yes. All right. Now, Blaine, on the 31st of October, did you go to school that day? Yes. And could you tell the jury how you get to and how you get home from school? The bus. And what kind of bus is this? A school bus. And looking again at exhibit number 25, can you tell me where the school bus picks you up? At the end of the road, right there. You are pointing to an intersection or the end of what would be Avery Road, just up near the office building and your grandparents' trailer. Is that right? Yes. In the afternoon, after school is over, how do you get home? The school bus. And can you tell me where the school bus drops you off, please? At the intersection at the end of the road by my grandpa's house or grandma's house, right there. Same place? Mm-hmm. You have to say yes or no. Yes. Now, your trailer is a little bit west or a little bit further down from that intersection. Do you know why the bus picks you up and drops you off near your grandma's trailer? I'm not sure. They just do. Yeah. Blaine, how do you get to and from the bus from your house? I mean, what does it matter if the bus stops there or not? I mean, I don't know. Like, what's the reasoning that Ken Kratz needs to know the reason why the bus picks them up there? All right, so Blaine, whoops, where did that just go? Blaine, how do you get to and from the bus from your house? I walk down the road. Okay, now back in October of 2005, was there somebody else in your house who also went to school with you? Yes. Who was that? Brendan. And who's Brendan? My brother. At Michigan School, Blaine, do you know about what time school lets out? 3:05. And after school lets out, and I'm going to specifically ask you about October 31st of 2005, do you remember what time you came home that day? 3:40 or 3:40? Sorry. 3:40? That's 20 to 4 in the afternoon, is that right? Yup. Do you remember coming home that day, Blaine? Yes. And could you tell the jury how you got home that day? The school bus. And did anybody come home on the school bus with you? Yes, Brendan. After you and Brendan got home at about 3:40, can you tell the jury what you did, please? We walked down the road. And why don't you use the laser pointer again and tell the jury when you walked down the road, where did you walk? Down here, right there. Okay, just so the record is clear, you are pointing that you are walking in what would be a westerly direction from where the bus dropped you off down to your trailer. Is that right? Yes. Blaine, why does he keep saying his name over and over? As you were, let me stop you. Let me go back and ask a couple of follow-up questions first. First of all, is there anybody else, any other people that live on this property or that did at the end of October of 2005? No. There's nobody else that lived on this property? Oh, yeah, yeah. Are you a little nervous this morning? Yeah, I am. That's fine. Tell me who lived on this property? Who else other than you lived on this property at the time? On our property? Well, anywhere on the Avery property itself, anywhere in the salvage yard. Me, my brother, Bobby, Brian, Brendan. Let me just stop you right there, Bobby. Or I'm sorry, let me just stop you right there. Bobby and Brian and Brendan, who are they? Those are my brothers. And are any of them older than you or any of them younger than you? Yes, Bobby and Brian are older and Brendan is younger. So that's the order in which. So Brendan's always been the baby. We've known that. And I believe Bobby's the old. No. Isn't there another one after Bob? Oh, no. Brian is the oldest, right? Then Bobby. Brian's already like not living at home really at this time. And so it's just Bobby, Brendan, and Bobby, Brendan, and Blaine. Sorry, I was blanking on the person who's on the stand right now. All right, question. Okay, and at that time, you know the day I'm talking about, don't you? Yes. At that time, you said that Brendan went to school. Yes. Do you know what Bobby did at that time? No. Do you know if he was working or if he was going to school or something like that? I'm not sure. How about your other brother Brian? Do you know what he was doing at that time? No. This guy doesn't know nothing about his brothers. Okay. Did anybody else and in that trailer that you pointed to, you talked about your mom. What's her name? Barb Jonda. He didn't say his mom. Barb Jonda. Tadych now. I'm going to show you. Oh, okay. Sorry, that was not highlighted. So now I'm going to skip the Maloo, skip the Maloo. All right. So you got a little bit of a basis of the beginning of his testimony. We're going to skip a little here and begin and continue. All right. So now, Blaine, you talked about getting home at 3:40. Do you get home at the same time every day? Yes. That day, that is Halloween of 2005, did you have some plans that night? Yes. Could you tell the jury what your plans were that night? My plans were to go trick or treating with my friend. And who is your friend? Jason Crisco. Jason. Did you go trick or treating with your friend Jason that night? Yes. And do you remember, after you got home sometime after 3:40 p.m., do you remember what time you left the house to go trick or treating? Yes. What time was that? About 5:25, 5:30. 5:25 p.m. Yes. How did you how did you leave your house, or how did you leave the property? Do you remember? I walked up the road. Did somebody pick you up? Yes. Who was that? Carmen Winch? Winch? I don't know how to say that. Okay. Who is that? She's my friend's mom. Okay. And did you go trick or treating that night? Yes. And so from 5:25 p.m. until some other time, were you gone? That is, were you off of the property? Yes. Do you remember what time you got home that night? 11. I'm sorry? 11 p.m.? Yes. Let me back up a little bit, and I apologize kind of jumping around here, but you talked about your Uncle Steve. Do you know if he lives on that property as well? Yes. Now, on the 31st of October, as you were approaching your house, as you got off the bus and you said you were walking down towards your house, did you see anything as you were walking towards your house? Yes. Can you tell the jury what you saw, please? I seen Steven Avery bringing a plastic bag to the burning barrel. What burn barrel are you talking about? The burn barrel. Whose burn barrel? Steven's. Okay. Did you see what kind of plastic bag he threw into the burning barrel? No. Did you see how big the bag was? No. Did you see what was going on inside the burning barrel? In other words, did you see what was in the burning barrel? Or what was burning in there? Sorry. Yes. Tell the jury what you saw about it and that it hold on. Tell the jury what you saw about it that it was burning. Describe that for them. I think the jury probably understands burning. There was smoke and flames coming out of the burning barrel. About what time was that that you saw this? About 3:46. 7. What? 3:46 to 3 or 3:47. Is that right after you got off the bus? That's why he's so precise, because it's every time he gets off at the bus at the same time. All right, so now when your Uncle Steve put a bag or put something into that burning barrel that was actively burning at the time, did you have any conversation with him? No. Do you know what Brendan was doing while you were home? Between 10 to 4 and a little after 5 that day. Yes, he was playing video games. Okay. So at least until 5, Brendan was still at home. Is that right? Yes. Now, when you saw your Uncle Stephen burning in his burning barrel, burning things in his burning barrel, otherwise Uncle Stephen wasn't burning in the burning barrel, that was poorly worded. When you saw your Uncle Stephen burning items in his burning barrel, did you see what kind of smoke was coming out of there, or did you know what he was burning in his burning barrel? No. Okay, now at 11, when you got home, do you remember walking to your house? Yes. And when you walked to your house, did you see anything over by your Uncle Stephen's house? Yes. Tell the jury what you saw at your Uncle Steven's house at about 11 p.m. that night. I seen Stephen Avery sitting there watching the fire. Watching what? Watching the fire, the bonfire. There was a bonfire at your Uncle Steven's? So who would use a body for a bonfire, like for the fuel for the bonfire? Like no one in their right mind would be like, "Hey, I'm having a bonfire. Why don't you come on over?" But the fuel, the source of what I'm burning is a human body. Like I don't know why they think that that makes sense. That just because Stephen had something burning meant, or that he had a bonfire meant that he was burning evidence and burning bodies. It's ridiculous to just presume that. But, anyways. All right, so there was a bonfire at your Uncle Stephen's? Yes. Can you tell the jury where the bonfire was, please? Behind the garage, which is where his burn pit is. All right, continuing on. Blaine, tell the jury how big that fire was. It was about 4 or 5 feet. What was 4 or 5 feet? The flames. So 5 foot flames you could see at 11 at night. Is that right? Yes. Now, how did you know that it was your Uncle Steve out there? Did you see him? No. Okay. What did you see out there? I just seen a person. Did you know who that person was? No. How many people did you see back at that fire? Just one. So he couldn't identify him from afar because he was walking away, he was just walking past. He didn't get close enough to identify who was out there. Question. And when you were interviewed by the police, do you remember the police asking you who you saw back by the fire? Yes. Do you remember what you told the police? Yes. What did you tell them? I said Stephen Avery. Now, you know your Uncle Stephen, is that right? Yes. And then he tries to get him to like backtrack or whatever. All right. So when you got home that night at 11, do you remember talking to anybody that night? No. Do you remember seeing your brother Brendan that night? No. If Brendan would have been in your bedroom with you, do you think you would have seen him? Yes. And did you see him in the bedroom? I don't remember. Crazy, right? I think we're probably good to go to cross now. All right, so let's move on to cross examination of Blaine Dassey. Make it bigger so my eyes don't hurt. All right, so let me find out. Okay, so it is Attorney Dean Strang who is going to be doing the questioning for Blaine Dassey. And that's cross-examination. All right. All right, Mr. Dassey, you have been approached by the police a number of times, I think, since October 31st, 2005, haven't you? Yes. Started probably a week later on November 7th? Yes. And on November 11th? Yes. November 15th? Yes. And times after that, right? Yes. Right up through today. When you talked to Mr. Fassbender during the break? Yes. And the police have asked you the same questions over and over and over about October 31st, haven't they? Yes. You give them an answer? Yes. And if they don't like the answer, they ask you again? Yes. Interesting, huh? Every day you get picked up by the bus at about the same time in the morning for school. Yes. In fact, probably like any other kid in high school, you know just how long you can stall before going out the door. Yes. Oh, I knew how to push my push it to like the seconds before the bus came. I like my sleep. Um, all right. And so you know that the bus comes between 7:08 and 7:13 in the morning, right? Yes. All right. And the bell letting you out of school happens at the same time every day. Yes, 3:05 in the afternoon. Yes. School bus is there? Yes. Back in October 2005, you had sort of a nice female bus driver? Yes. She was the same bus driver every day? Yes. And then every day she takes the same route home, dropping kids off? Yes. So you know almost to the minute, roughly, when you get off the bus every day, right? Yes. You get off the bus every day with Brendan, assuming he's not sick or something? Yeah. Now, that's why you were really pretty sure that you got off the bus at 3:40, something like that? Yes. On Halloween 2005. Yes. You and Brendan walk down the road and you both go into your house? Yes. You remember because you were asked just a week later that when you walked in, Bobby was home? Yes. Bobby was sleeping? Yes. Bobby was not out deer hunting? Yes. You and Brendan woke Bobby up? Yes. You remember doing that? Yeah. And then you kind of hung out and you were on the computer until it was time to go trick or treating. Yes. Brendan was there? Yes. He stayed in the house playing video games. Yes. And the whole time you were there working on the computer, he was playing video games? Yeah. So, what Brendan said about the video games, we know that was true. Like, there, there's no reason to doubt Brendan's sincerity of his versions of the events that happened that day up until he got questioned by police uh, over and over and over again. Bobby, at some point, left, or do you remember? I'm not sure. I don't remember. Okay, but he wasn't out deer hunting. He was in bed sleeping when you got home. Yes. Now, whether it was when you were walking down that driveway from the bus or when you are walking back up to get in the car with Carmen and go trick or treating, did you hear any young woman's voice screaming for her life? No. Do you hear any gunshots? No. If you had heard gunshots or someone screaming for their life, that's something you would remember. Yes. All right. And one thing that the police asked you over and over, if you did remember, is whether you saw a fire that day. Yes. Do you remember that? Yes. They asked you that the first time they talked to you on November 7th, didn't they? Yes. Which was the next Monday, right? Yes. And you told them there was no fire. You didn't see a fire. That's what you told them on November 7th, isn't that right? No. Hmm. Okay. I think that might have been the last of his because I we got pretty much the main chunk of Blaine's testimony. Did I? I don't think I re oh no. Okay. Up next, we are moving along. Did I skip any people that we didn't go over? There was, okay, so hold on. Let me go back to this handy dandy little thing. So we were on day 10 with and 11 with Sherry Culhane. And then there was a forensics guy, okay, this forensic scientist from the Wisconsin State Lab, and he was called as a bloodstain expert. So again, more of the scientific um, stuff there. He was on the stand both the both the 11th and the 12th day. Now we're caught up to Blaine Dassey. And then after Blaine was a friend of Earl Avery, he was present at the Avery yard hunting rabbits on the 31st. I don't believe he saw really much of anything, but just like talking about the fire and all that again. All right, so we're gonna now skip to Scott Tadych, who is the friend of Barb Chanda. Friend? He's a little bit more than a friend now. At the time, he was a friend while she was getting a divorce, and then they got married, her and Scott. So I think maybe she might have had an affair with him, but I don't care, and I don't know. I don't know what the truth is, or if she was maybe she turned to him for comfort. Who knows? But I do think that she should have been weary of him because I'm a little weary of him. So Scott Tadych is someone who owned property. He owned like hunting property also in like right in the area around that Stephen around like around the bend when like if it was very nearby Stephen's the Stephen Avery property or the Avery property. He had some property that he owned, and it was apparently some hunting property. So, like, why would he? He said he was going hunting, but then he didn't even use his own property. So it's just weird. I mean, this whole thing was weird. But let's move on to Scott Tadych, day 12, and let's see what he's gonna say. And then this will be our last witness for this part. All right, so Scott Tadych called as a witness. Mr. Tadych, I'm going to ask you some questions. Sorry, this is Ken Kratz. Questions regarding October 2005. Let me ask you if you remember that particular day. Yes. And can you tell the jury how it is that you can remember that day? How that day sticks out in your mind? It was the fire that I remember most of the day. The most of the day. You said the fire that you remember most. Can you tell the jury what fire you are talking about? The fire by Stevens trailer. Let's back up just a little bit. Sometime on the 31st, that afternoon on the 31st of October 2005, do you remember what you were doing? Yes. Could you tell the jury what you did that afternoon, please? That afternoon or that morning, I was up by my mother. She had surgery. Then I left her and I went to the woods hunting. I went to my trailer and then I went to the woods. What kind of hunting did you do that day, Mr. Tadych? Archery hunting, bow hunting, archery. About what time was it that you got out into the woods or that you got to your deer hunting stand? Around 3. On your way to deer hunting, that would be just before 3 p.m. Did you observe anybody on the roadway? Yes, I did. Could you tell the jury who you saw on the roadway before 3 that afternoon? I saw Bobby Dassey on Highway 147. That was my dog just like thumping down on the ground. Um, so Scott Tadych runs into Bobby Dassey. Bobby Dassey, the brother who supposedly was deer hunting that day, but we know also that could have been just an excuse if he was doing something. A part of me thinks that Scott and Bobby kind of did something together. I don't know. I think that they are both complicit. I don't know in what way or what regard, but these two just rub me the wrong way. I just have like a not so good feeling about them. All right. So, anyways, sorry. I saw Bobby on Highway 47, 147. Which way were you going and which way was Bobby going, if you recall? I was going west and he was going east. So they pass each other. Where is it, Mr. Tadych, that you hunt? Or at least that day, where were you going to go hunting? In Kiwani. Now, at that time, that is the 31st of October of 2005. Did you know anybody who lived on what is known as the Avery salvage property? Yes, I did. Who did you know on that property? Everybody that lived there. Okay, is there anybody there that you knew better than somebody else? Barb Jonda, I guess. All right, well, who is Barb Jonda now to you? My wife. So, yeah, I guess I would say he probably knew her the best. I suspect you weren't married to anybody else on the property? No. All right, so Mr. Tadych, after your hunt was completed, about what time was that? About 5:10, after 5 or so, 5, whenever dark was. Do you remember if you had gotten anything that day? No. At 10 after 5 or sometime after 5, tell the jury where you went, please. I went back to the Jonder residence, the Dassey residence, to pick up Barb to go back to Green Bay to see my mother. All right, do you remember what kind of surgery your mother had that day? She had back surgery. Barb at that time, Barb Jonda, what was your relationship with her? We were friends, I guess. All right. Were you dating at the time? Yes. But they're just friends, I guess. Mr. Tadych, when you parked that vehicle there sometime, so now he's parked his vehicle on the Avery property, right by the Dassey, I'll call it the Dassey boys trailer. So, Mr. Tadych, when you parked that vehicle there somewhere or sometime at about 5:15, did you notice anything or observe anything unusual around that property? If you recall. If not, we'll move on. I don't recall at that time. Did you pick up Barb then? Yes, I did. And where did you guys go? Back to Green Bay. Did you visit your mother in the hospital? Yes. How long did that visit last? Do you recall? I was up there until probably, I don't know, 7:30, quarter after 7, 7:30, sometime after 7:30 p.m. Then, did you return to the Jonda property? Yes, I did. And were you still with Barb at that time? Yes, I was. When you got back to the Jonda property, was it light or was it dark out? It was dark at that time. Okay. Moving on. All right. So I don't know. Do you guys trust Scott Tadych? I sure don't. Um, I sure don't. But uh, anyways, let's finish this up. Something about him just rubs me the wrong way. About 7:30 to 7:45, did you notice anything unusual around the property at that time? Yes, I did. Could you tell the jury what you saw at that time, please? I saw a big fire. Can you tell the jury where you saw the fire, please? Right there. You are pointing to an area just south of the garage known as the Steven Avery garage. Is that right? Yeah. Could you describe the fire for us, Mr. Tadych? It was a big fire. It was bigger than normal. That's all he says. Okay. That's got a couple aspects to it. I'm going to go one at a time. First of all, you said it was a fire. Did you see flames? Yes, I did see flames. Did you notice if anybody was standing in the area or around the fire? Did you notice anybody back there? Yes, I did. Do you know the defendant, Stephen Avery? Yes, I do. And did you see Stephen Avery standing next to or near that fire? Yes, I did. Did you see what Stephen Avery was doing at the time? Standing there, standing by the fire. All right, are you able to estimate from your observations how high or how tall the flames were as you were watching there about 7:45? They were almost as tall as the garage. Really? I mean, even if they are tall flames, I don't believe that they were 10 feet tall. or almost as tall as the garage. They could have been tall because he was burning tires and other things that around the property that, was trash and stuff. So it could very well be that he had tall flames. It doesn't mean that Teresa was under the debris there, I mean, it just doesn't, one doesn't equal the other. Just because he had a fire doesn't mean that she was there. All right, so 8 feet, 8 to 10 feet. I don't know. 10 feet, maybe 10 feet tall, the flames were. It was a big fire. It was a big fire. All right. Did you ever get out of your vehicle at that time? No, I did not. Did you ever approach the fire or approach Mr. Avery at that time? No, I did not. Where did you go then, Mr. Tadych? I went back to where I was living at the time to the trailer house on 147. Okay, I think, yep, now we're on to cross-examination by Attorney Dean Strang, cross-exam, or cross, but still same day, um, the day 12 of the trial. All right, so Mr. Tadych, you remember October 31st, 2005 because you skipped work entirely that day. I did not skip work. I took vacation that day to go be with my mother. That is, you were not at work. Right, I wasn't at work. I didn't mean to suggest it was unexcused, not, but you did not go to work on October 31st. No, I didn't. You went to Green Bay to see your mother. Yes, I did. So already he's starting off like defensive and ready to jump down the attorney's throat if he says anything like, I did not. So this is going to be interesting, huh? All right, so you went to Green Bay to see your mother. Yes, I did. She had recently had surgery, you say. Yes. Other than your mother, who would have been who would have seen you on October 31st before you say Bobby Dassey saw you as the two of you drove past one another on Highway 147? Nobody. Just I went to the hospital and then to my trailer. When do you when do you tell us today you got home from the hospital? I got home. That was weird wording of how to question that, but okay. I got home from the hospital for the first time. I got home from the hospital between 2:30 and a quarter to 3. And that's your recollection today. Oh, 15, 16 months after the events? Yes. Did okay, so I guess he's showing him something to refresh his memory. And the second paragraph may be the most helpful in refreshing your recollection, but you are welcome to read it all to yourself. It is an exhibit, Division of Criminal Investigation report. Did that help refresh your recollection? Yeah, it did. Did you tell the police on November 29th that you arrived home at 3:15? I may have. Well, do you remember telling them that or not? No, I don't remember telling them that. It's been such a long time. Do you think that maybe back on November 29th, your recollection was a little better than it is today? Yup. About events happening at that point just 1 month earlier? What was that, sir? Do you think maybe your recollection back on November 29th, 2005 was maybe a little better than it is today? Yes. I love it when an attorney gets someone on the stand to admit that they were wrong. It's great because it's so like tactful and like such precision in the way that lawyers go about asking their questions to get to what they need on cross, like especially for a defense attorney trying to uh, break a witness. Anyway, I'm really appreciating the defense attorneys in the Karen Reed case as I'm watching it, and it's so fascinating to watch a good defense attorney just break down a witness on the stand. Anyways, all right. Now, you then you get home You very quickly get ready to go off deer hunting. Yes, you are going to drive west from your home to go deer hunting down Highway 147. Yes, it's a 15-minute drive or something like that to your hunting spot. Approximately, yeah. And this is when, on your way to hunting, is when you see Bobby Dassey? Correct. He's going east in the other direction on Highway 147. Correct. Now, Highway 147 at that point, if you know, is what's the speed limit? Speed limit on 147? Yeah, if you know, 55. 55, all right. And the two of you obviously are going in different directions. Yes. And so you pass each other, and you are later able to tell the police that Bobby was going deer hunting. Yes. Well, how did you know that? How do I know that? Is because Bobby Dassey was going to the trailer where I live to hunt behind it. Let me understand. He's going to hunt deer right behind your trailer. Yes. But you don't hunt deer right behind your trailer. Occasionally, yes. But so like why wouldn't you just go hang out with Bobby and chill and like go hunting together? I don't know. Is that not a thing bros do? I have no idea. All right, so occasionally, yes. And when did he tell you about this hunting trip that he planned right behind your trailer? I don't recall him telling me. He had permission from my landlord to hunt there. So you figured since you saw him driving east on Highway 147, he must be going hunting? Yes. Anybody else see you going west on 147 to go hunting so far as you know? Bobby Dassey. Uh-huh. And had you told him that you were going hunting? No. How would he have known that you were going hunting? Because I was in my camouflage clothes. Wait, Kratz objected after the fact. He was going to overrule it anyways. But relevance, no, I think how would you know that you were going hunting? How would Bobby Dassey know you were going hunting is a valid question. Why would that be irrelevant? I don't know. But anyways, you were in your camouflage coat. Yes. In your green Ford Ranger. Yup. Passing one another at 55 miles an hour. Nope. Where I passed Bobby, I probably was only doing maybe 25 an hour tops. He was slowing down to turn in my driveway, and I was driving up 147. I see. And so you surmise that he would have known you were going deer hunting because he would have seen you in your camouflage clothing. Yes. You guys buying this? Did you go hunting with anybody that day? No. I want to go back just a moment because this was my mistake. November 29th, 2005 was not the first time you spoke to law enforcement officers about Halloween, was it? I don't recall. Does November 10th sound more like the first time? Yeah, that sounds more like it. Okay. About 10 days, 11 days after Halloween. Correct. And on that occasion, you also told the police that you arrived home from seeing your mother in Green Bay at 3:15. True? True. Now, if I understood your testimony here today, you get back to Barb Jonda's home at about 5:15, something like that? Yes. Oh, did you see a fire there? Oh, yeah. At 5:15? I don't recall seeing fire at 5:15. All right. When do you tell us today, or when did you tell us today, that you first recall seeing the fire? I like that he's kind of saying, when did you tell us today? Because maybe he told you or told somebody in a different proceeding, or maybe even just caught up in like his own lies. Somebody could have heard him say something else. All right. When do you tell us today you first recall seeing the fire? I first, in the burn area. I first remember seeing the fire. Mr. Tadych, let Mr. String finish his question first. Fire, burn area, behind garage. Today, when did you tell us you first saw that fire? I really remember first seeing it the second time I was there. So he picked up Barb, they went to his mom's, and then he dropped her back off, supposedly. Do you recall telling the police on November 29th that you saw a fire burning in the area behind Steve's garage between 5:15 and 5:30? Um, oh, he's telling. I was like, wait, what is the court interjecting? But he was just telling him to take away the exhibit. All right. Do you recall telling the people, the officers, that between 5:15 and 5:30 on October 31st, 2005, you saw two people standing around a fire that was burning in the area behind Steven's garage? That was the second time I seen him standing when I came back. I don't recall. You don't recall telling the police you saw that between 5:15 and 5:30? Not that. No, I don't recall. All right. I seen it a second time. Why is this so confusing? Having looked at that, does that refresh your recollection about what the police told you, or what you told police, sorry, on November 29th? Yes, it does. Did you tell the police on November 29th that between 5:15 and 5:30 you saw two people standing around a fire burning in the area behind Steven's garage? Yes, I did. Memory fresher than it is today? Fresher back then than it is today? Is your memory fresher today, or was it fresher back on November 29th? Fresher back on the 29th. And is that if I understand you today, you are telling us that when you see the fire later, sometime after 7:30, you think the flames were almost as high as the garage, maybe 8 to 10 feet? Yeah. Okay, buddy. Was November 29th also the day that you told the police that the flames were at least 3 feet high? At least that high. Must have. Huh. So the flames grew 7 feet in a couple years. Unbelievable. It is insane how much people's m- memory or testimony statements change over time. Again, I'm relating it to the Karen Reed case because I'm watching it every day, and there's just so much to discuss about it because there's so much corruption regarding just everybody on the state side. It seems like a lot of people are lying. A lot. All right. Moving on. So he told them 3 feet in back in November, which was a month after the event took place, after Teresa went missing. All right, so must have. All right. Question. Whenever you saw this fire, and however many times you saw it, you smelled nothing strange coming from the fire? No. You heard no one screaming? No. You heard no gunshots? No. You didn't see Mr. Avery trying to conceal himself in any way? No. Especially at 7:15, 7:30 when you drove up, you would have driven up the driveway with your headlights on? Yes, because it was after dark. It's already getting dark earlier. Barb, by the way, at that time was married to your cousin, Tom Jonda? Cousin. This is just unreal. Correct. You know, separated or whatever? Yes. You remember specifically that you wanted to watch a show called Prison Break. Correct. So this was, hold on, I should have read more about that. But the name Jonda comes from your cousin Tom. You are absolutely right. Okay. And so she comes to your house, and the two of you are going to watch television. Correct. You remember specifically that you wanted to watch a show called Prison Break. Correct. Is this something you were recording on the VCR? No. Or TiVo, something like that? No. You were going to actually watch it as it was broadcast. Yes, which is why you think you got home at 8. That's exactly why I wanted to be home. Now he stays, or now she stays, the two of you watch that show? Correct. You have a memory of watching that show. Yup. And then your recollection, as you told us today, is that she leaves somewhere around 10:30 or 11? Correct. Oh, that's right. So she drove back to his place and he wanted to watch whatever, he wanted to be home in time for Prison Break. So you're quite sure that she leaves and goes home. Yes. Well, you talked with the police yet a third time, I guess at least, didn't you? After November 29th. I may have. March 30th, 2006. Does that sound about right? Could be. And investigator John Dettering from the Calumet County Sheriff's Department. Could be. Do you recall telling investigator Dettering that Barb spent the night at your residence and did not go home, and that you knew she did go directly to work from your residence to your knowledge? I don't recall that. You don't recall that. Okay, do you think reviewing investigator Dettering's report might help refresh your recollection about that? I'm sure it will. Interesting. All done? All right, does that help refresh your recollection? Yeah, I guess. About what you told Investigator Dettering. Yes. Did you tell Investigator Dettering on March 10th that Barb spent the night at your residence and did not go home? Oh, my dog's like right in the doorway. All right. Did you tell Investigator Dettering on March 30th that Barb spent the night at your residence and did not go home? Barb did go directly to work from your residence to your knowledge. Yes, I did. Barb works an early morning shift, at least at that time. Yes. Until sometime in the mid-afternoon. Yes. Noisy dogs again. I don't know what they're doing. All right. So until sometime in the mid-afternoon. Where was I? Okay, so Barb works the early shift, at least at that time, until sometime in the mid-afternoon. Yes, sometime around that time that you talked to Investigator Dettering on the occasion you just described, were you trying to sell one of the Dassey boys' 22s to a man named Jay Matheson at work? What? She supposedly had her life ended by a 22, and now we found out that one of the Dassey boys had a 22. Well, we know Bobby was definitely into shooting and hunting, and we know he had a 22. Um, Interesting, huh? He's trying to sell it. If that was maybe the weapon that was used. He says no. You weren't. And you are sure, though, that you watched the show Prison Break starting at 8 p.m. on Monday, October 31st, 2005? Am I sure? Yeah. Yep. Are uh, are you sure of that? Maybe not. As you are you as sure of that as you are of anything you here, testified to here? Okay, maybe not. I don't know. They were talking over one another again. But I'm sure that's when I went home to watch. Okay, you are sure it was 8. Yeah, you, as sure as you are, I'm sure it's 8. Are you as sure as you are as and anything you testified to here today? I guess not. I don't know. That's all I have. I love it when a defense attorney gets them to acknowledge, like, oh, well, Yeah, maybe I don't trust my own memory. Interesting. Interesting. So we've gone now through Blaine, Bobby. Those are the only two that testify for. Whoops, I keep clicking on the wrong thing. So up next, we're gonna go through. I'm not gonna go through Bobby Dowart's um, cell phone testimony. So if you guys are interested in that, I definitely recommend looking um, at the transcript for this is day 12. Yes, day 12. So he's actually called to the stand and then he leaves and then he's recalled. This Bobby Dewart, he was recalled on the stand, so he might have some interesting stuff to say. And then there's also a singular wireless store manager to give testimony. So we're not going to read those. So if you guys are interested in that, I definitely recommend it. All right, next we got a special agent, Tom Sturdivant. He discovered bones in the burn pit. He was also present when a lot of when the first bone was discovered. Sorry, so he was present when the first bone was discovered. Dr. Simley, Dr. Simley is a dentist, so a forensic look at the teeth. Perhaps they did find a couple teeth, I think. He matched and found a tooth to Teresa from X-rays. Then we have Karen Halbach, Teresa's mother, and Dr. Leslie Eisenberg. And we are going to pick up next with Dr. Leslie Eisenberg. She's the forensic anthropologist. She examined the bone fragments. And so we'll get into a little bit of her testimony. She's from day 13, and that goes on until the 14th. And I can't remember there's another person. Is it Kenneth Olson? I can't remember how I bunched them. But anyways, that's where we'll pick up as Dr. Leslie Eisenberg, the forensic anthropologist who examined the bone fragments. So we'll go through a little bit of that and then we will be almost done. We're getting there. We're not going through everybody. Like I said, Jeffrey Jensen. That's the guy. He's the medical examiner. So we're going to go through the medical examiner and the forensic anthropologist's testimonies in the next part. And then we have not that much more. Yeah, we'll be almost done with the state's case, and then we can wrap it up, and then we can get to what you call it. Then we can get into the defense's case, which might be a little more interesting when it's the defense calling the witnesses and we get a little more meat maybe as to some of the things that they were trying to flesh out during cross-examination. So we will keep on keeping on with this trial. I apologize for the lag. I think it's been almost 2 weeks since I put one out. So I apologize. I don't intend to do that again. It was just, bad timing with computer and trial starting and just everything. So, anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I appreciate you guys for being here so much, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care, guys. Bye now.
If you've been impacted by a true crime and would like your story told in your own words, or if you or someone you know has been wrongfully convicted or accused of a crime, please write to crimeincourtchannel@gmail.com and tell us your real true crime encounters. Thanks for watching.